Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising the towns of Londonderry, Hudson, and Auburn. And I have for your consideration this morning Senate Bill 108 FN, relative to participation in the New Hampshire Public Defender Program in the State Employee Health Insurance Plan. And Mr. Chairman, I'm here this morning as prime sponsor of this bill, and I ask all of you for your support. The New Hampshire Public Defenders Program has a well-known recruitment and retention problem. High vacancy rates and turnover have plagued the program over the past several years, which in turn plagued the criminal justice system in our state. Over the last year, 7 regional news outlets have released stories accompanied by commentary of New Hampshire judges and other interested parties expressing concern over the lack of available public defenders and the impact it is having on processing cases. Similarly, the Sixth Amendment Center, a nonprofit commissioned by the New Hampshire Judicial Council, analyzed the situation at the New Hampshire Public Defender's Office and issued a report this fall saying that New Hampshire has many well-qualified, skilled, and passionate defense attorneys providing representation all across the state. However, these attorneys are placed in an untenable situation in which they are asked to carry excessive caseloads while being undercompensated. As a direct result of lack of available counsel, there is a backlog of over 650 cases the New Hampshire Public Defender's Office is struggling to process and close. Attorneys are not the only employees affected. New Hampshire Public Defender's Office has struggled to retain and attract support staff such as investigators, paralegals, and administrative assistants, all of which impact the ability of New Hampshire Public Defender's Office to carry out representation. Mr. Chairman, I do have written testimony. I'm going to skip over some of it because you all can read it. But I think what's really important is an internal poll of the attorneys found that medical care was the third most important issue facing their employment after caseloads and wages. Anecdotally, attorneys report that their deductibles are too high, that their network of providers are insufficient, and that access to mental health care is limited. As an added factor, the cost of their current insurance is quite expensive in exchange for a rather mediocre plan in comparison with the premium costs of the state health insurance plan, which has much more robust coverage. For example, the annual cost of a New Hampshire Public Defender current family plan is currently $35,592.12, while the cost of the state employee's HMO family plan is $32,366.10. It is further worth noting that the Public Defender's Office provides a healthcare reimbursement plan, HRA, which pays for up to half the cost of medical expenditures subject to the deductible, and the deductible is currently $4,000 for an individual or $8,000 for a 2-person family plan. The deductible for the state plan is $500 for a single plan or $1,000 for a 2-person family plan. So if we choose to move them into the state plan, it will see additional reduction in costs related to reduce or potentially eliminated liability concerning the cost of maintaining an HRA. In the end, permitting the public defenders to participate in the state employees' health insurance plan is a win-win for all parties. The bill simply allows for an option for the public defenders to join the state's health insurance plan. Exercising this option would go a long way towards addressing the recruitment and retention problems clearly facing the public defenders program. It should be noted that the public defender program is 100% funded with general fund dollars. The state's health plan is also more cost effective, so the program would likely save money, and so in turn, the tax dollars funding the program would be spent more efficiently as the program would be purchasing better insurance at a lower cost. Just one more thing I would like to add to my testimony this morning, Mr. Chair. I would ask the committee to consider making a minor amendment. Currently, the effective date is 60 days after passage. giving the timing of our legislative session and understanding that the New Hampshire Public Defender's current health insurance contract ends on June 30th, 2023, I would respectfully ask that you change the effective date to effective upon passage. And there are others that are here today that can speak to the necessity of this change as well. And also, Mr. Chairman, I have handed out to the committee a chart which looks at the differences between the public defender plan and the state HMO plan. And so you can see exactly what is covered, what is not covered, and what the cost differences are. So at this point, Mr. Chair, I will conclude my testimony, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? I guess I have one. So the Public Defender's Office employees are currently not on the state plan. Is there do you know why that is?
Mr. Chair, I don't know why, and there might be people here who
Okay.
can answer that question.
All right, great. I will save it and ask it again. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll bring up Sarah Rothman speaking in favor from the New Hampshire Public Defender's Office. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the committee. Thank you for taking up this bill, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I think at first, just very briefly, I can explain just a little bit about the New Hampshire Public Defender. So we just in 2022 celebrated 50 years, and we contract with the state, as I'm sure that you're aware, and we've been awarded this contract every year for the past, I think officially it's been since 1985. We were founded in 1972. But so for the past almost 30 years, we've been awarded this contract to provide representation to indigent defendants. We provide representation to between 85 and 90% of all criminal defendants in the state of New Hampshire. So we are the one-stop shop for criminal defense in New Hampshire. We're here today asking you to approve this legislation because it will benefit all stakeholders in the criminal justice system. All stakeholders, judges, court staff, city prosecutors, county prosecutors, defendants, the Attorney General's office, all stakeholders are impacted by retention problems at the New Hampshire Public Defender. When NHPD cannot retain our staff, it results in delays and logistical problems for everybody in the system, not just for our organization. When we struggle due to staff attrition, it makes it difficult for everybody in the criminal justice system in New Hampshire to do their job. So we're here, we're not just asking for this legislation to improve the lives of our employees. We're asking you to help the criminal justice system in New Hampshire to function. Because put pretty bluntly, when we struggle with retention, it really impacts the entire system. And put really bluntly, it can essentially slow everything down. So since we are an organization, currently as I sit here today, I think there's 253 employees. Since the fiscal year 2021 alone, 140 employees have left NHPD. Certainly we've filled those positions, but we've had a turnover of 140 people since fiscal year 2021 alone. In fiscal year 2022, 52 employees left the New Hampshire Public Defender. So that's, an average of one employee every single week. In just the first 7 months of this fiscal year, FY23, we've lost a staggering 44 employees and counting. So every time we lose a staff member, we have to devote substantial resources to recruiting, interviewing, and most importantly, training new staff members. All of our different types of roles at the public defender, so we have attorneys, we have investigators, and we have support staff. Each one of those groups require extensive training in order to do their job. And so when we lose attorneys and investigators in particular, their caseloads must be transferred to their already overburdened colleagues, and that then just perpetuates this cycle of attrition. We need to break the cycle, and this legislation will help us do that. So, why has attrition spiked, particularly in the last 4 or so years? And I think a large part of that is because the benefits that used to draw and keep people at NHPD have eroded over time. As you heard from Senator Carson, our health insurance has become more expensive for our employees, and the quality of the benefits has decreased. The state health plan will keep people at the New Hampshire Public Defender. We're competing in a historically hot job market. We're competing with the private sector, and I think more importantly, we're competing with neighboring public defender programs that offer better pay and better benefits. We will continue to struggle with attrition if our staff can leave the New Hampshire Public Defender and go to a neighboring state with a public defender that has a better benefits package to offer. As Senator Carson mentioned, we are requesting one change to the bill, and that would be that it be effective upon passage rather than after 60 days. And we're asking for that because we are under contract under our current plan with Cigna until the end of the fiscal year, June 30th. And so we need to be able to time, if we are able to switch over, we need to be able to time that, of course, so that there's no lapse, but also so that we do not incur could be potentially very significant penalties. So if we needed to terminate our contract with Cigna early, my understanding is that they would then take a percentage of all of the claims that they have processed in that fiscal year and charge us a fine, a fee of that percentage of the claims. And in addition, they will also, there's also a potential of us actually having to pay out of pocket for claims that are for services that have been provided to our employees but haven't been paid by the insurance company as of the date that we terminate that contract. So we could be on the hook for paying for, just flat out paying for health care. And so that's some of the reasons why we're asking for the wording of the legislation to be changed. And as Senator Carson noted, because we are 100% funded from the general fund, if we have to incur these kinds of penalties, really then that's, the taxpayers paying for those kinds of penalties. So we're asking for that flexibility there. I certainly do want to thank all of you for considering this legislation and let you know that as the executive director of the New Hampshire Public Defender, this bill does have my full support. Our employees have been clear. Healthcare is a priority for them. The ability to join the state health plan would be a game changer for our organization. It will draw people to NHPD. It will keep people at NHPD, and I have a lot of confidence in that. And as I've mentioned, this is a benefit not just for NHPD and for our employees, and not just our clients who we represent. It's a benefit for the entire criminal justice system. If we can do better at retaining our staff, then all stakeholders benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? I guess I have one. So you have a pretty high employee turnover, it appears. Are you doing exit interviews on the way out and understanding that, I mean, are you of the opinion that the benefit is really the major problem that you're having in employees?
I think it's definitely one of the major problems. I think that, yes, so the answer is yes, we do extensive exit interviewing with all staff, not just with attorneys, but with support staff. And, what we hear frequently is that, I could find better pay, I can find better benefits, and I could find a lower workload. But actually what we hear is that the workload, if they had better pay and benefits, they could deal with the workload better. It would justify that. So I think that, there's a lot of reasons why people leave, but I do think it is a common theme that we've seen in exit interviews. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to call up Carrie Keene and Joyce Pittman from DAS.
Good morning. I must have had poor penmanship. My name is Cassie Keene.
Oh, Cassie Keene, I'm sorry. You know what it is, S's. My eyes aren't the best this morning. Sorry about that. My apologies.
No, it's my fault. Thank you.
Well, welcome, and thank you for clarifying with that.
Thank you. So my name is Cassie Keene. I serve as the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Administrative Services. And this is Joyce Pittman. She's the Director of Risk and Benefits and is responsible for administering the health benefit plan on behalf of state employees, retirees, and certain statutorily authorized groups. We're here to oppose the bill, and I think it's important from the outset for us to say that there have been efforts through various pieces of legislation over the years to add certain groups to the state's health benefit plan, and our position is that we oppose those bills, and we oppose them on several different bases. One is that we have a very, very small staff that is administering a plan on behalf of 37,000 people. I asked Joyce yesterday, how many staff do you have? By the way, I used to be the director of risk and benefits, so I've lived through all these issues. And Joyce said 13 people work on the state health benefit plan. So it's through that lens that I want you to understand that we see these efforts to add groups to our health benefit plan. We are generally concerned about joining other groups to the health benefit plan because of the concern that it will drive up the cost of health care, right? We are a self-insured plan. When people go to the doctor, when they go to the hospital, when they fill a prescription, that means we pay for that health care. That is reflected in what we call our working rates, which you may think of as premiums. And what concerns us about legislation like this is that people come to the health benefit plan when their own costs are going up and they become unsustainable. And I would say if you ask Joyce and I what our primary responsibility is with respect to running the health benefit plan, it's cost containment. We focus on it all the time. And our job is to keep costs down as much as possible so that we can sustain the very rich benefits that we do have available, and so that we can sustain the cost share that our employees have through collective bargaining, and so that we can protect the state's interests with regard to paying for health care. So these are all very, very real concerns for us, and we use lots of mechanisms to contain costs. One of the chief among them is that we regularly procure for both health benefits, and today our third-party administrator is Anthem, and for pharmacy benefits, we have Express Scripts. So I'd like to share a little bit about what other efforts have there been to join other parties to the health benefit plan. Back in 2013, which was when I first joined DAS and I was first the director of risk and benefits, there was a bill to allow towns and municipalities to join the health benefit plan. And we opposed the bill at that time. And I'm telling you this because for us, this is not about one entity or another. It's about our ability to administer a plan and our ability to contain costs. And among our concerns are it's not just Joyce's division in DAS that has an impact. There's an impact to our division of enterprise management, which is the computer system that we use, and that is we would accept a file from an entity that we would then have to send data to our third-party administrators saying, here are the people who are on that plan. So there are these indirect impacts in assets in adding groups to our plan. Most recently in 2018, there was a bill that was presented and it would have permitted CCS&H to join the health benefit plan. And actually, we worked very closely with CCS&H and the legislature. And if you're curious, I would refer you to RSA 188F:68. And what this piece of law does lay out is a process that we agreed to with CCS&H about if you're interested in joining the state health benefit plan, there are a few things that we really need. And first of all, what we need is to pay for a study to determine the impact, the financial impact of what would it cost to add these members to the health benefit plan. And so RSA 188F:68 says that CCS&H is responsible for the cost of that plan. We would then arrange through our health benefit plan consultant to do a study of what the cost would be. That information would be delivered to the DAS commissioner, and under this statute that I'm referencing, that information is provided for the legislature to make the decision. The statute says that CCS&H has to pay for its own members, it has to provide data as required for all the stuff you do to administer a plan. And one other provision that I think is really very key is that it says that if CCS&H decides to join the plan, that they have to join for a minimum of 5 years. And we're very concerned about adverse selection. We don't want a group to be able to decide when can we join and when can we leave, right? Because that means they join when their costs are high, they stay as long as it's beneficial to them, and then when our costs go up, they leave, and then we have higher costs. So we're, again, our primary goal is we're always trying to contain costs. And I think that this statute, if you're interested, I think provides a decent model for what might be a way to approach this situation. I think one of the points in mentioning the different pieces of legislation over the years is that everybody wants to be on the state's health benefit plan. It's something we acknowledge. It's a really great plan. It has very rich benefits, and we're a large pool, and we do keep our costs down. We work very hard. We're concerned about maintaining our ability to keep costs down, and we're concerned about the very limited staff that we have to run the plan. So I think that sums up what our concerns are, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Senator Carson.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. The question that I have is that, well, it's not really a question. Are you aware that we are constitutionally required, both through our state constitution and our federal constitution, to have an office of the public defender? Because it says everyone who is entitled to representation. And so this is an obligation. This is not a choice that we as a state have to provide. So I think that there is a difference here between the community college system. We are under no obligation to provide higher education. It is something that the legislature has decided that it is to the benefit of our state as well as our country to provide that higher education. But in this case, we don't have a choice. We must have public defenders to offer legal services for people who do not have the ability to pay. So I see the difference. I understand what you're trying to do with talking about the community college system, but I think at this point we're talking about apples and oranges. We must provide this service. And in talking with folks about this issue, this is a big problem. And this is a huge impediment in keeping attorneys employed for the state to provide this service. Because you talk about cost containment. If we can't provide this as a state, we're going to have to contract outside. And that is going to cost the state a heck of a lot more money than what it's going to cost to pay for this health care. So I just want to make sure that you understand my position here. I think this is a smart thing to do for the state. I understand that you want to try to keep costs down, and we appreciate that. And that you only have a limited number of individuals to administer this plan. I work for the community college system. I know, I have a pretty good idea about how many employees would have been added. I don't think that we're talking about the same number. This is a much, much smaller group of individuals. And I think, quite frankly, this is something that we can do. And so I appreciate you coming in here today. But I just wanted to ask if you were aware of the differences.
I do understand, Senator.
Thank you.
How many employees or people did you say you currently have on the state plan?
So we have approximately 37,000 total. 27,000 of those individuals approximately are members of the active employee health benefit plan. So it includes employees and their family members who are eligible under the law.
And the other 10,000 are,
Retirees and
Retirees.
their dependents, again, who are eligible under the law.
gotcha, okay, thank you. Any further questions? I tried to write that number down and I missed it.
Okay.
Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. That's all right.
All right. Elena Forsaniti, I'll probably kill this one too. I'm trying not to, sorry. How'd I do? Good. All right.
Good morning, yes, Eliana Forsaniti.
Eliana, okay.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Good morning. Yes, I have been with the New Hampshire Public Defenders for 10 and a half years now. I'm a staff attorney with them. As a staff attorney, I have a full caseload consisting mainly of serious felonies. On top of my full caseload, I also participate in the trial skills team, which we are a group of individuals of lawyers who train the incoming class each year. And we also provide trainings throughout the year to our incoming class. My husband, Philip Dreyer, is also with the Public Defenders. He has been with the program for approximately 8.5 years, also with a full caseload of serious felonies. In 2021, 5 days before Christmas, we welcomed our daughter, Catalea Eva. And it was the first time that we really ever had to use our health insurance.
Say congratulations, I didn't want to interrupt.
Our health insurance. And so we always had known about our high deductibles and our out-of-pocket max, but it was the first time that we had to really bear the burden of paying for that. And frankly, I'm still paying that deductible and that out-of-pocket max. As luck would have it, this past year, we had a bat in our house. And we did not know whether the bat had rabies or whether we had been bitten or scratched, and frankly, how long the bat had been living with us. And so all three of us, including our 6-month-old, had to get rabies shots, which I don't know if any of you have ever had to do that, but it's extremely painful, extremely expensive. And so again, we maxed out our deductible and are really close to maxing out our out-of-pocket max. And so as I look to my 5-year plan, I don't currently have any plans, Sarah sits behind me, to leave the Public Defender's office. But my 5-year plan certainly does include having another child, that we would like to grow our family. And frankly, we need to think as a family whether it makes sense to stay with the Public Defenders or whether it makes sense to move to a different job where maybe the pay is the same but the benefits are better, or vice versa. And it's something that we frankly are thinking about and considering. And that's my story, but it does apply to many, many others in the program. As Sarah spoke about, I truly believe that the lawyers who have been here for 3 to 8 years are really the backbone of the program. They're the ones that we need a lot of in order to have a stable, effective, efficient public defenders program for various reasons. So, if I leave, you can't just give a new lawyer coming out of law school my caseload. You need to train them. We need to invert resources into them. And it's really around the 3-year mark where we start getting a return in that investment. They're able to take on a full caseload. They're needing less co-counsel. They're needing less help in mentorship. And also importantly, and that goes on, right, as we get to the 8-year mark, they're starting to take even more serious cases and mentoring and co-counseling cases as lead counsel. But also importantly, they provide support and resources to the new class, to those 1st and 2nd year lawyers. And that's extremely important because, we get this, we have 18 new lawyers, is my understanding, who are being hired. Great, amazing. They're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to get going. But they go to their office and there aren't these 3 to 8 year lawyers who are needed to provide them the support and the co-counseling and the mentorship that they need. So they're getting cases that they're not ready for. They're getting overwhelmed. They don't feel like they're being a good lawyer, and they leave. And so we have this vicious cycle of never getting a mass of 3 to 8 year lawyers. And these 3 to 8 year lawyers are also the ones that are thinking about starting a family, right? 3 to 8 years outside of law school, they're in their late 20s, early 30s. They're starting to think about having a family, and they're thinking about how much it costs to have a family with our health insurance plan. And so I think that if we can give them this benefit, we can retain the 3 to 8 year lawyers that we currently have. We can recruit laterals, which I know we're trying to do, but it's hard. As Sarah was talking about, we're competing with other public defenders programs. So it would help us recruit laterals and help us keep those first to second year lawyers. They're really important because then they become those 3 to 8 year lawyers. And so for this reason, I support this bill. Obviously, I think it would be a great help to recruiting and retaining lawyers. Oh, and also the incoming class is, particularly focused on therapy, right? They're going to these, their offices and feeling overwhelmed, and they're not able to afford therapy because the co-pays are $80 to $100. And so they're both not getting the support they need in their offices, but also they're not getting the support they need out of their offices. And so I thank you for your time, but I really support this bill, and I really think it would go a long way to helping us.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none?
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Kara Samard. Good morning.
Morning, Senators. Thank you for hearing from me. I'm used to standing as a litigator, so this is awkward. So my name is Kara Samard. I'm speaking in support of this bill. I currently work at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law as a visiting assistant professor and the interim director of externships or legal residencies. I've been there for approximately 2 months. Prior to that, I worked at the New Hampshire Public Defender's Office. I worked there for almost 9 years. And I have been a practicing attorney in New Hampshire since I graduated law school and passed the bar in 2007, just over 15 years now. I was born and raised in this state, and I plan to spend the rest of my legal career here. And I'm now a statistic of this state, one of the ones that you heard from Executive Director Sarah Rothman as one of the experienced public defenders who left the program when I loved the work, I loved what I did. But I left for better working conditions, professional growth, better work-life balance, better pay, and better benefits. And I'm here today to support my colleagues at New Hampshire Public Defender. I'm here as a clinical professor with current and future law students who will be starting their professional careers at New Hampshire Public Defender. I'm here today as a member of the New Hampshire Bar who cares deeply about the legal profession in this state. And probably most importantly, I'm here as an advocate for indigent criminal defendants and as a citizen concerned about the criminal legal system in this state. There are a couple of points I want to make about why I think this bill should pass. And part of it is rooted in my experience at the New Hampshire Public Defender's Office, and part of it is based on my current role as a clinical law professor. Public defense is very rewarding work, but it is also stressful, and the lawyers carry a heavy burden. The workloads and schedules are less than ideal. Dedication to the work and the clients is often prioritized over the lawyer's own personal lives and families. Like other frontline workers, public defenders experience is that there is a cost to caring. They experience the constant painful toll of facing social injustice and inequality on a daily basis. And public defenders are particularly susceptible to secondary trauma stress, also known as vicarious trauma, from the effects of being exposed to the facts of their cases and the trauma of their clients that they've experienced. Public defenders experience the associated mental and physical effects of this trauma, of the working conditions, and of the system as a whole. And those that have done research on this have recognized that public defenders also face distinct mental health challenges such that a typical mental health advice is not necessarily suitable. For example, just seeking out counseling, talking to a friend, or exercising. And what the studies have shown is that it's not necessarily sufficient. There are additional barriers that public defenders face when they seek out professional mental health care. In addition to the costs and the network providers and finding, counselors where there's an overburdened system in the mental health industry, but additional struggles in finding a therapist who understands public defense work. This is one reason why public defenders need decent and affordable health care. My experience with New Hampshire Public Defenders health insurance involved a very expensive and high deductible. When I came to the New Hampshire Public Defender, I left private practice. I came here to the Public Defender, one, because I wanted to be a public defender and represent indigent criminal defenses. But I was also informed that the benefits were exceptional, and it was a great place to work. And the benefits changed over time, and they got worse. Those that my colleagues who wanted to seek out counseling often chose not to because of the costs that Eliana spoke about, $80 to $100 per visit until you reach the deductible, thousands of dollars. For a newer public defender who's making a lot lower on the pay scale, that might be the reason they choose not to seek out counseling. And those are the ones that probably should be seeking out counseling early to help manage the stress and the trauma of the job so that they can stay there long term. I had a few miscarriages before I finally had my daughter, and one of them required a surgical procedure. Again, maxing out the deductible. Thousands of dollars I had to pay in addition to dealing with the grief and the stress of the job. Once I finally paid off that deductible, I had a successful pregnancy and had a baby in a different plan year. So then I maxed out the deductible again, paying another additional thousands of dollars. And then this past spring, while trying to do one of those lawyer wellness things where I played soccer and ran, I tore my ACL while playing soccer, and I had to have surgery. So not only was I incurring, again, thousands of dollars to pay off my deductible, but I couldn't play soccer and I couldn't run, and I was dealing with the stress of the job. Then my insurance provider cut me off from physical therapy when I wasn't quite ready to go back to running because they decided I wasn't progressing quickly enough. So some insurance agent who had no knowledge of my real progress in treatment decided that we've spent enough money on you. And so I was timid about going back to running. And when I left in December, I was not back yet. And I was paying off my deductible. So those are just some of the personal stories that I had with dealing with our high insurance plan, our high cost insurance plan. And so my opinion of our healthcare plan at New Hampshire Public Defender is that it's too expensive, it's too restrictive, and it's generally not adequate to address the demanding work and the needs of public defenders. And benefits such as good health care also, as you've heard, highly affect recruitment and retention of lawyers. My second point is more about the future of New Hampshire Public Defender and the legal profession. When I was in law school, we didn't learn about things like lawyer burnout, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue. Law school was competitive, it valued hard work, and it required you to be tough. Things have changed drastically over the years, and that comes with a lot of research and understanding about the legal profession and the needs of it. And I value the information and education that is now readily available about the importance of lawyer wellness, so much so that I included a session on my class on professionalism strictly about lawyer burnout and compassion fatigue. And that's so the next generation of lawyers will have the necessary awareness and education to meet the demanding work of a legal career. But it's not just me doing this. The American Bar Association recently modified its accreditation standards to improve legal education to the benefit of law students, law schools, and the legal profession. It added a new requirement to add that law schools shall provide substantial opportunities to students for the development of a professional identity. And it further identifies, among other things, that professional identity should involve an intentional exploration of the values, guiding principles, and well-being practices considered foundational to successful legal practice. I attended a remote panel discussion last Friday with other externship professors across the country put on by the American Association of Law Schools. A good portion of that discussion included the various ways that clinical law professors are teaching lawyer wellness to their students. Law schools now have mental health counselors for students readily available for them at their need, and the mental health counselor and their use of a mental health counselor will remain confidential. And this is all new stuff that's happening across the country. Why is this important? It is important, it's because it's what lawyers graduating from law school across the country now expect. The practice of law is changing, and that is not only there is finally recognition in the health needs of lawyers, but there are proactive steps being taken to educate and inform incoming lawyers about this. Lawyers entering the profession, lawyers being recruited to the New Hampshire Public Defender, will have expectations that their employers are also looking out for their well-being and their health. And they will demand that they have access to good, affordable health care. And they'll do that by choosing employers that offer it, public defenders' offices that comply with their demands. While healthcare is not going to solve all of the problems with the indigent defense system in our state, improving the healthcare will certainly be one significant step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, the final person I have on here is Greg Erskine. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Greg Erskine. I'm a stay-at-home father of 4 and resident of Manchester. I'd like to thank this committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak, and I'd like to thank Senator Carson specifically for sponsorship of the bill, which I am strongly in favor of. My wife Heather and I and our 4 kids just moved here from Kentucky, where we lived for the last 8 years. We moved there because my wife was hired by the Louisville office of the Public Defender, and we've just moved to Manchester because, frankly, it seems better run. We're excited about it, and SB 108 is a bill that would impact our family greatly. One of the reasons that we decided to uproot our lives and move to New Hampshire was because New Hampshire's office does seem to be better run. So this bill, which is likely to give the public defenders a better health plan, is exactly the kind of lure that would bring in the best and the brightest from all over the country. But the other reason that we wanted to move to New Hampshire is that it is my home. I was born in Concord Hospital, I was raised in Manchester, I was educated in Manchester's public schools. My parents were both likewise lifelong residents of Manchester, as were my 4 grandparents. I'm overjoyed to be back in my home state, and I am happy that my wife's work can serve the state that I love so deeply. And I feel extraordinarily blessed that we'll be able to raise our kids here. We do our best to keep our kids healthy with regular checkups, good food, running around in fresh air, but one can't always prepare for every eventuality. Last summer, our 5-year-old complained that her back was sore. We asked the doctor about it. She said it was likely nothing major. We just kept an eye on it, and the problem continued to worsen. Eventually, x-rays showed severe damage to her lower spine. No one knew why. The spinal surgeon who examined her said he'd never seen anything like this. The doctors ran tests, scans, biopsies. I spent many nights with my little kindergartner in the hospital. Eventually, it was determined that it was a bacterial infection, which could be treated with antibiotics, although there's still damage to the spine. This experience brought home to us that there are some severe illnesses that simply can't be prevented or prepared for. They befall us, and we can only hope that the medical professionals can help, and that our insurance's out-of-pocket maximum doesn't ruin us financially. If SB 108 passes, the switch from NHPD's current insurance to the state employee program could save a family such as ours thousands of dollars in the event of an unforeseen medical emergency such as the one we experienced. We moved here because my wife's job allows her to serve the most vulnerable citizens of New Hampshire. SB 108 is legislation that will help working families who are here to make New Hampshire a better place for everyone. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to welcome you home.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I was going to say the same, but you
Thank
beat
you.
me to it, so. All right, anybody else wishing to speak? I have Bob Blaisdell and Gary Snyder from the SEA who have signed in favor. Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 108. It's you again. I will recognize Senator Carson to introduce the bill, Senate Bill 210, relative to the licensing of software applications by state agencies.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair, and good morning to my fellow committee members. For the record, my name is Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising the towns of Londonderry, Hudson, and Auburn. And I have for your consideration this morning Senate Bill 210, relative to the licensing of software applications by state agencies. And let's see, I do have, Mr. Chair, there is a proposed amendment. I believe everyone has been given a copy of that. That is amendment number 0327 S. And that amendment, which has been worked on by the stakeholders, including the Department of Information Technology, is to clarify the intent of the bill. This legislation is intended to improve the state's negotiation ability to prevent restrictive software licensing terms and practices, and to ensure greater choice and more competition, and to protect against surprise cost increases. One area where this legislation is particularly important is in cloud computing. The evolution of IT systems have seen the rise in cloud computing services aimed at reducing costs, improving efficiency in workflows, and strengthening cybersecurity. But states across the nation have been discovering restrictions buried in contracts on license, portability, and additional charges for trying to put software on anything other than the software provider's own cloud platform. You will hear from the Coalition of Fair Software Licensing further about the need for this legislation, but I believe it's important to ensure our state agencies are safeguarded against the potential of aggressive and anti-competitive actions that tie the hands of our IT professionals and agency personnel and place our systems, data, and taxpayers at risk. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your consideration of this legislation, and I ask that all of you recommend Senate Bill 210 ought to pass with amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I will admit that I have read this bill I don't know how many times, and I'm still struggling to fully understand what it does.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that comment. You're in luck today. There are people behind me that are going to explain this thing fully.
I knew that was going to be your answer.
Thank you.
All right, we'll call on Ryan Triplett from the Coalition for Fair Software Licensing. Good morning. I'll ask you to turn your mic on, and I think you got your work cut out for you to explain this to all of us, so commence when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Pearl, the now departed, well, exited, Vice Chair Carson, and all members of the Executive Departments and Administration Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the bipartisan legislation that will support the digital transformation initiatives of the Granite State.
Ryan, could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry, I don't think
Yes,
you gave your name.
that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a lot of thank yous. I wanted to make sure first.
All right.
My name is Ryan Triplett, and I am the Executive Director of the Coalition for Fair Software Licensing. Our membership includes North American companies and trade organizations representing a diverse cross-section of key industries, including healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, and technology. The mission of the coalition is to advocate for the widespread adoption of the principles for fair software licensing, a set of 9 industry best practices designed to create greater clarity, innovation, choice, and security in the cloud. The coalition welcomes the bipartisan legislation before us today, introduced by Senators Carson, Perkins-Kwaka, Birdsell, and Bradley. Additionally, I would like to thank Commissioner Goulet for taking the time to meet with us prior to this hearing and working on language that clarifies the intent of the legislation to adhere to the current and future best practices of New Hampshire. SB 210 protects the ability of New Hampshire to choose the infrastructure technology provider, including for cloud computing services, that best meets the needs of the Granite State, separate and distinct from its software dependencies. Cloud computing offers tremendous opportunities for software customers, including cost savings, workflow efficiencies, and greater flexibility in the evolving workplace. For the state of New Hampshire, this translates to being able to do more with the taxpayer dollars to better serve its citizens and businesses. Unfortunately, the use of restrictive software licensing tactics by vendors of integral software threaten to undermine these benefits. While these tactics may take many forms, SB 210 addresses the increasingly pervasive use of limiting conditions for core software products and services, including in their deployment and associated discounts, on the adoption of certain cloud computing vendors. These harmful practices are already prevalent in other states, as was noted earlier. The coalition has heard from CIOs and CISOs throughout the country at both the state and municipal level, spending significant time navigating similar restrictions and opaque licensing terms rather than focusing on the digital transformation strategies of their states and innovation to serve their citizens. This is a waste of state resources and taxpayer dollars. SB 210 is an important step in ensuring that New Hampshire's departments and agencies have the flexibility and cost efficiencies needed to affect its digital transformation strategy by requiring that all software contracts entered into by the state agency be deployed on the infrastructure or hardware of the agencies, not the software vendors, choosing, and supporting greater interoperability and integration capabilities throughout the cloud stack. What this legislation does not do is ask the government to pick figurative winners or losers. Instead, SB 210 advances open competition amongst all of the vendors seeking to serve New Hampshire's technology needs by ensuring that software licensing negotiations remain separate and distinct from cloud service negotiations. This translates into lower costs and increased services for New Hampshire's agencies and taxpayers alike. Before I close, I do want to note for the committee's consideration that similar legislation was taken up and passed by both Colorado and Missouri last year to protect their states from similar negotiating tactics in the future. Additionally, I've shared to enter into the record a letter of support by the Computer and Communications Industry Association, NetChoice, Alliance for Digital Innovation, as well as the Coalition, in support of 210. Thank you for the opportunity to appear to you today. The Coalition for Fair Software Licensing respectfully requests the committee's support for SB 210 and the precedent it sets. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I guess it's you and me. Do you have any questions? I'm not sure I still have my head fully around this, but I certainly appreciate the information you're providing, and I'm doing my best to figure it out. So thank you.
We stand at the ready to answer any questions you have in the
There
future.
probably will be some, so I appreciate it. Next, so the final speaker we have is Commissioner Goulet from DOIT. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dennis Goulet. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Information Technology. Today I'm not taking a position on this bill, but I did think it was important to share some information around the process and my thoughts on a couple things. First of all, originally I was requested a fiscal note for this, and Mr. Chair, I had the same issue as you do, and I actually understand technology, so I think the language was written, in such a way as to be kind of, pretty broad, and as such, it impinged on our ability to implement economies of scale by standardizing on hardware in the state. So the amendment that you see before you addresses that issue for me and makes it so that the fiscal impact for DOIT and the executive branch that I wrote up originally goes away. The overall fiscal impact of the amended bill to me is undetermined. So I am aware that we're pretty familiar with the market, and we do a lot of cloud computing as well as traditional computing in our data center here at Hazen Drive. I am aware that some companies who both have the cloud computing hosting capability as well as software licensing capability, do differentiate their pricing based on whether it's being operated in their cloud versus somebody else's. That does exist in the marketplace as stated. There are two ways to look at that. One is that it's unfair. It's differentiated pricing and it's unfair. Another way to look at that is that it's an implementation or a leveraging a competitive advantage by virtue of a company that's invested in vertical integration. So those are the two sides to that. It's not for me to determine which of those is correct, but I wanted to place that on the table for the committee's consideration. And that concludes my testimony.
Thank you. I have a few questions that I've sort of jotted down here, and I'll run them by you, and I guess, and then after that, I'll open it up to the other committee members. So in reading this, as I was trying to understand it, what problem does this bill help solve for your department?
Well, I can't, I looked for an example where I was being harmed by the existing marketplace situation, and I haven't. So I'm not feeling like, going forward, perhaps we would get into that situation in the future, but I'm not in it now presently. But because I was researching the bill, I did see some examples where it could occur.
So there's no glaring immediate need for the legislature to intervene at that level. I mean, it's not.
Not from my, existential level today, no.
Mm-hmm. How many current vendors under contract with the state of New Hampshire would this impact or affect? And that may be a tough question to answer, so a ballpark guess would be.
I'm aware of, 4 to 6 pretty large tech titans that could be involved in that would fall on either side of this issue.
Okay. I only have a couple more.
Yeah, probably.
If this bill or the amendment is enacted, will those vendors need to renegotiate their contracts? And if so, how much higher would those cost, or what cost impact would that have?
Yeah, that's undetermined because, if enacted, in some cases, I think the existing licensing structures for some of these companies might not be legal in New Hampshire, and so I don't know how that would be dealt with. Frankly, it's uncharted territory for us.
Okay. Just let me make a note on that. I do have one more. I just want to write your answer down. And my last one. If the state is no longer able to purchase software banned by this legislation, what would the impact be to the state's operation and the cost of moving to new products?
Well, moving, again, it's undetermined, but I will say that if moving from one system to another, especially one that's being broadly used, is extremely expensive. And
that's what I have.
I don't have a further information
no, that's
beyond
fair.
that.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Perkins Cloaca.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one thing I'm just trying to understand in all of this is that how does the software and sort of the cloud sync up for you guys? I mean, do you, as I understand it, maybe you could just clarify that I'm understanding it correctly. You would buy a subscription to a license for Microsoft Office Suite, for example, that runs on all of our state computers, and that's hosted on a cloud server somewhere run by Google or Amazon. And so essentially what this is trying to do is de-link the Microsoft piece of your contract from the Google and Amazon piece of that contract. Is that roughly correct?
I mean, that specific example may not be relevant, but I could genericize it by saying that there's a piece of software that I could run on any of the large cloud providers. That piece of software may cost more to run or more to license on the non-native. In other words, if the software is owned by company A or licensed by company A, and they also are providing the infrastructure that it's running on, that may actually be a lower cost total subscription cost than if it was hosted in provider B or C who does not own intellectual property rights on that software. Does that make sense?
Maybe. I'm confused. Follow up.
Oh, please, yes. Sorry, I was listening.
That's okay. I guess I'm confused why the hosting infrastructure would have intellectual property rights. And that's confusing to me.
Well, if the talking about vertical integration,
Right.
if the same company
Yeah.
owns intellectual property rights to the software and also has
The infrastructure.
the ability to host in a cloud scenario, then
Yeah.
they have the built that, that's a differentiator for them.
Sure.
So,
That makes sense.
and hence my comment on the second piece of, how you could potentially view it. You can
Right.
view it as unfair, or you can view it as leveraging an advantage.
Yeah, competitive investment, sure. And
One more?
then,
One
yes,
more
follow up, Chair, if I may. You mentioned that the amendment allows you to utilize economies of scale on hardware. Could you just elaborate on that a small
Well,
bit?
as written originally, the original language was so broad that agencies could start buying their own hardware and, or choosing their own hardware and not going on our standards.
Okay.
And so really, my fiscal note represented me misunderstanding the legislative intent. But
Okay.
once I understood the legislative intent, we were able to amend so that the intent stayed the same while preserving my ability to run
Procure.
IT in New Hampshire correctly
Yeah.
based on our current authority.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Goulet.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, seeing none, I have a little bit better understanding. I still don't know that I have my head wholly around it, but I thank you for your testimony.
All right, take care.
So that's all I have signed up. Anybody else wishing to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 210. Thank you. Next, we will open up the hearing on Senate Bill 204, and I will recognize Senator Birdsell. Isn't that you? Oh, 134, I'm sorry. I skipped one. My bad. You didn't want to introduce 204? All right, how about Senate Bill 134? And we'll recognize Senator Birdsell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for hearing my prime bill, Senate Bill 134, disability pensions for public safety employees who are victims of violence. The intent of this bill is actually, I think, very lofty. It would provide financial stability for some of the sacrifices that our first responders have had, those who were victims of intentional violence. It would allow them treatment through their retirement, as well as allowing them to get stipends for insurance. Now, that being said, I have spoken with Senator Carson, and I think the bill itself needs some work. She has spoken to the stakeholders, and we would like to retain this bill. And I will commit myself as well. I'll commit Senator Carson as well, because she said she would. We'll work on this through the summer and try and put something together that everyone can support.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions?
Just that I believe the motion available to us in the Senate is to re-refer.
Re-refer,
Maybe.
yeah.
Okay, just
My house experience is starting to come through.
My house experience was there. I knew what you meant. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
We'll call on Stephen Arnold from NEPBA. You'll have to explain to me what the acronym is for, and he is speaking in favor. Good morning, Senators. Appreciate your time today. Thank you for allowing me to come before you today. My name is Steve Arnold. I am the State Director of the New England Police Benevolent Association. We represent over 700 law enforcement officers in the state.
I'm a retired Portsmouth Police Detective. Senator, nice to see you in person. I'm also a past president of the New Hampshire Police Association and a former trustee on the pension fund representing Group 2 Police. As the Union State Director and Representative, one of the responsibilities that I have is that of the utmost importance is responding to police-related shootings. I have interacted with police officers who have been injured with minor up to critical injuries, perpetuated by bad actors. I have also stood in the hospital room of a police officer shot and killed in the line of duty. A duty they swore an oath to serve and protect the citizens of this great state. A responsibility that each of these brave men and women understood to mean the potential of death, or serious bodily injury, each and every time they pin their badge on and go to work. As they assume their duty every day, the goal is to return to the station, return home to their families after their tour of duty is over, unharmed. It is also understood that the nature of the job that they may sustain injuries while performing their assigned duties. Nearly all injuries sustained are not related to violent acts, but in most cases a result of horrible accidents. The state's workmen's comp carriers, as well as the New Hampshire retirement system, have procedures and mechanisms to deal with on-the-job injuries that may result in accidental retirements. In the event of a deliberate violent attack on a police officer delivered by a gun, a knife, a club, a bomb, a car, just to name a few, police officers who have been deemed unfit to return to duty due to their injuries have been retired under the current accidental disability retirement. This bill before you distinguishes between those hurt during the regular course of their duty and those who are a victim of a deliberate violent attack that results in a career-ending injury. You will hear testimony from Officer Paul Lewis, sitting behind me, a member of the NEPBA, who is serving the town of Ware, New Hampshire in his capacity as a patrol officer. Paul had about 8 months on the job in total. Paul and his partner, Sergeant Austin McGuire, were involved in a gunfight initiated by a domestic violence suspect. Officer Lewis was shot in the arm during the exchange of gunfire. You'll hear from him concerning the struggle to recover from those injuries, ultimately leading up to his forced retirement due to the injuries he sustained. You will hear of the financial hardships he has faced, including the loss of his job, payment for his insurance, his minute pension that quite frankly cannot pay the bills on a month-to-month basis. You will also read testimony from Dan Doherty, a Manchester police officer, who was shot multiple times in the line of duty, and his many surgeries and procedures necessary to keep him alive. He too has suffered the same losses of Paul and more. These officers were lucky to be alive. However, should they have been killed on those fateful days, their families would have been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars from the state and the federal governments. Instead, these men survived only to be met with the burdening cost of recoveries, loss of income, inability to work in their chosen profession, not to mention the mental anguish they suffer each and every day. We as a community have a responsibility to take care of those who swore an oath to protect and serve us, not be pushed aside and asked to fend for themselves after surviving the unthinkable. This bill should have happened long ago. We as a society have seen an increase in violent attacks against our law enforcement heroes. They need our assurance that they won't be left behind and that we will stand by them through their painful recovery, through thick and thin, and ensure that they won't go broke trying to get well. I am asking for your support, Senate Bill 134, and recommend that it ought to pass. In closing, this is not a bill that's going to bankrupt the state of New Hampshire. There is such a small class of people that would be qualified to accept this type of retirement. myself and Ken Chamberlain sitting behind me, you'll hear from him as well, with help from Mario Oliveira from Massachusetts that has spearheaded a national movement to try to get this bill passed in many states, and he's been successful. What we want to make sure that the committee is clear is that we're not talking about run-of-the-mill accidents, that you may occur on the job and ultimately you may face your retirement. But this is about bad actors performing bad acts on police officers, in the course of their duty. So we want to make it clear that there is a difference clearly between the accidental retirement that currently sits on the books and this type of action. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Senator Perkins Corker.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but, and thank you for being here today. Are you involved in the discussions about sort of improving the bill or aware of what the issues are?
Yes, I'm very much involved, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we thank
Thank
you
you
for
very
coming
much
in
for your
today.
time.
Ken Chamberlain from the New Hampshire Police Association is speaking in support.
Morning.
Good morning and welcome.
My name is Ken Chamberlain. Retired 2019 from the Manchester Police Department, where I was an investigator with the traffic unit. I served over 27 and a half years as a police officer. My first 11 years, I served with the Hooksett Police Department, where I was a patrol sergeant. I'm a former president of the Manchester Police Patrolmen Association, where I held that position until my retirement in 2019. I'm also past president of the Hampshire Police Association and still currently reserve officer with the Manchester Police Department, and I serve on the legislative board for the New Hampshire Police Association. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 134. On March 21st, 2012, Dan Doherty was was a Manchester police officer, and he was working a shift swap. He wasn't supposed to work that night. He was working for the 12 shift. That night, that shift was a complete life-changing shift for Dan. Dan, unfortunately, is not able to attend the hearing today. It's not because he doesn't want to be here. He has prior plans that he had with his wife and daughter that took him away from the state that he was not able to change. He made those plans well in advance of this hearing. But I do have written testimony from Dan that he asked me to submit for him, if I could do that. Thank you. Dan also asked me if I could apologize for his absence to the committee. He also wanted me to thank each of you for all that you do and the sacrifices that you make every day just to make our state safer and stronger. So Dan's event happened on March 21st, 2012. At that time, he was 24 years old. He had 3 years and 9 months on the job. He's currently 36 years old right now. The day of the event, Dan was in a Mark Cruiser in a full uniform. He encountered the suspect, who investigators later found out had made statements prior to this incident, just prior to the incident, that he was going to go shoot a cop. Dan was shot 6 times. He was left bleeding on the sidewalk. Doctors at the CMC hospital said, with the amount of blood that Dan lost, most patients would have, their organs would have already started shutting down. They were amazed that his organs hadn't shut down. At the time of this incident, like I said, I was a traffic investigator. I was assigned the task of mapping or diagramming the scene to scale. So having done this, I stood at every position in this scene, including where Dan was and where the suspect was. This area was where the shooting took place, these two were, it was a very close range to the point where you could almost touch each other. It was, I'm giving you this explanation just to provide you with information so that you can see that this shooting was not an accident. The intent of this person was to kill Dan, was apparent. The suspect was determined to shoot a police officer, and unfortunately that police officer ended up being Dan, and this was not an accident. The trial started in December of 2012. It was about 9 months after this incident took place. And mind you, when we, just to back up, going into that hospital room and seeing Dan, especially at the beginning, we didn't think he was going to survive. So even him surviving would be a miracle. 9 months later, 18 plus surgeries later, these would include the types of injuries that he suffered. He had massive internal injuries. He lost 2 feet of his intestines. His left tibia was shattered. He had a titanium rod inserted to replace his tibia. He had damage to his organs. Basically, when he fell back on his back and the suspect continued to fire at him, a bullet went under his vest and just bounced around, causing massive internal injuries. He still has bullet fragments inside his body and his organs. I mean, I can go on with the list. I'm just giving you an example of the type of injuries he had. He also had physical therapy in the hospital so he can get his motion back to walk. December, to start that hearing, Dan got enough strength to be able to put a uniform on and walk into that courtroom. And I'm just giving you this to give an idea of just the strength that he had, but it was very moving to see him walk in there. But he did that so he could show this person, that his attacker, that he didn't beat him. And I'm giving you this information just to show you what kind of officer Dan was. And I say was because he's not a police officer now, because that was taken away from him. He tried to be a police officer and he came back. He thought he had 10 and a half years on when he went back to work, when he retired. But with the injuries he had, it just wasn't something he could keep doing. So that dream he had about being a police officer was taken away. He didn't quit being a police officer. It wasn't his decision not to do it. Someone else made that decision for him. I also tell you this to show you the heart and will he had to survive and the dedication he had to his community, not only to protect and serve, but if needed, pay the ultimate sacrifice, which by a fraction of a mark either way, the grace of God, he survived. The last round that was shot at him when he fell back on his back hit his gun. And Dan's gun was raised to shoot back at this person. So if you do any shooting and you're aiming at something, you can imagine where that bullet would have went if it didn't hit the gun. So basically, I'm just, the one thing that we have as law enforcement, and this bill also, I know Steve mentioned, we're both saying law enforcement, but the firefighters too. They run into a building or into just for a fire. I know I'm going off for Dan right now, but I just want to make sure I hit this point. They don't think, just like us, we don't think about the hazard we're running into when we're going in to help someone. And there are people out there that do things because they want to harm us, including firemen. And they run into a building and that building's booby-trapped, which has happened before. They need to be protected too. And that's why they're included in this bill. But so to back up, the reason why, one of the things is we, as first responders, even the firemen and policemen, we don't have any issue putting ourselves out there and risking our lives to help someone else. But the thing we have difficulty doing is asking for help. And that's what we're here for right now. This is where we're coming in. This is where myself come in. This is where Steve comes in. Legislatively, I've consulted friends here. I've done this, been working as a legislative person, consultant for the NHPA and for my union for several years, and talking to members up here at the legislative, at the legislature. They've helped me a lot to try to do stuff, and so I appreciate their help I've had up here too. But this is where we all come in. We need to help Dan. We need to help the police. We need to help the first responders. They're not going to ask for help, so we need to do something to help them. I started talking to Dan more about his pension, and that's when I realized that his pension situation, his medical situation, his healthcare situation, he needs help with all of that. And there's a difference between, like Steve was saying, there's a difference between a slip and fall, and I'm not taking anything away from someone that's working and gets injured. They need help, but there's a difference between that and a deliberate, intentional, violent act that's specifically directed at a police officer or a firefighter while conducting their duties with an intended purpose to cause death or serious bodily injury. And that specific violent act was the direct result of a permanent injury to that person. There's a big difference. It's no different than and I've done some research looking up different things, and it's no different than a combat injury. They basically were in combat. So whatever injuries you can think of that you would suffer in combat, these aren't clean injuries. They're compounding injuries. They might have had a specific injury at that date of the event, but today they have injuries now that are resulted from that original injury. Physical therapy every day they continue to have. In Dan's instance, this past November, he had an issue where he had a infection in his intestines that almost went septic, and he potentially could have died from that. They were concerned that might have happened. If something happens to them and they succumb to an injury that was a result of something that happened back at the original incident, it's a line of duty death. It's no different than that. Plus the psychological stuff that comes along with this. It's no, like I said, it's no different than a combat thing. So I'm asking for your support in Senate Bill 134 and to help and to give these members the support they need to help them. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony, certainly your service, and certainly thank Dan for all of us for his service. And his story is incredible, what he's been through. So there really are no words. You're all heroes, in my opinion, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Marty Carlin from the New Hampshire Retirement System is the final speaker I have listed.
Excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the record, my name is Marty Carlin, representing the New Hampshire Retirement System. As this is a policy decision, NHRS doesn't have a position on the bill. I signed up just for informational purposes and was going to describe the existing disability benefits, but if the committee's pleasure is to re-refer the bill as the sponsor requested, I'll keep my testimony short and just make the offer that, if there's any need for technical review or input as the bill's being worked on, the retirement system would be glad to provide that assistance. We did identify in the current bill being heard today some technical issues. Some of those are in the fiscal note, so it's sort of a roadmap for some of the things that could be tightened up. But again, we'd be glad to assist with that, and be glad to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. I'm sure Senator Carson and Senator Birdsell will be working with you on this. Any questions? Seeing none. Do we have someone else that wanted to speak? Come up, please. Please sit down and introduce yourself. Turn your mic on, please. Turn it off. On. Nope, hit the button and the red light should come on. There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Lewis. I'm a retired Ware police officer, and bear with me, I haven't yet told my story amongst such a large audience, so I'm hoping to do my best here. I'd like to first get into my history, what happened, and then the battles afterward. So I always had a dream to do something big with my life, and I got my bachelor's degree in social work, and then I went onward to get my master's degree in clinical social work. And the whole time I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be that change that a lot of people were looking for, to be someone that understood why a person might be committing a crime as it related to mental health. I graduated the police academy in December 2018, and 8 months later, my sergeant and I, at about 1:40 in the morning, were called to a domestic where a husband was holding his wife hostage. We get to the house, we go inside, we put ourselves in between the wife and the husband, and immediately we're met with a gun pointed at us. He shot 6 times in our direction, and 2 hit me in my right and dominant arm. We took cover behind the cruisers after leaving the house, and I was bleeding out. An artery was severed. We had to use a tourniquet. And in that moment, I didn't know what was going to happen. I truly thought I was going to lose my life and never see my family again. I was brought to the hospital. We waited 12 hours for my sisters to come down from New York to see me before we went into surgery, just in case I died. We did the surgery. I woke up. I was met with a bunch of doctors. They told me that I would never be able to use my hand again. A radial nerve was severed. It gives us use of our hand. And in that moment, I was at least grateful to be alive. So I didn't realize how much of an issue that was going to be, losing my right hand. Flash forward a couple of years, I'm starting to do better. I've had 4 surgeries. I had a miraculous surgery called a tendon transfer where they rewire your whole arm and hand, and it gives you a little bit of use. But it was going to be many years of learning how to use my hand again to get it to work. Unfortunately, what I've learned through this experience is if you take gunshot wounds, they're hard to come back from. It's a lifelong physical battle to recovery. August of 2021, after being told by my surgeons that I could get back out there and live my life, I was tossing a ball to my friends and my arm shattered where I took the bullet. And that was the hardest time of my life because it was 2 years later and I was starting to do well and everything reset. I got my 5th surgery November that same year, 2021. And during that time, they found an infection in my arm, a staph infection. So this arm completely covered because I had to get a recent surgery, and then a PICC line in my left arm that extended all the way to my heart. And I remember a visiting nurse came one of the weeks to do my blood test, and I went to scratch my nose, and she pretty much yelled at me. She said, "Don't bend your arm that way." And for the first time in a long time, it's hard for me to get angry, but I got angry. I said, "What do you expect me to do? I can't use this arm, and you're expecting me not to use the other one?" And she understood, but it was very difficult. And in all that time, all I was thinking was I'm supposed to be learning how to use my hand again because I had this tendon transfer, and now I can't do that. So only recently have I began learning how to practice with my hand, and I still have a long way to go with it. If I hold more than 2.5 pounds, I drop it. It's barely usable 3.5 years later. And then on top of all that, the physical battles don't even compare to the financial ones. And that's why we're here today. I was brand new out of the academy. I was making $21.50 an hour with a master's degree. And now I get 66 2/3% of that. And on top of it, I have to pay my own health insurance now. In fact, when I retired October 2021, I cut a deal with my town where they were going to pay half the premium, and I would pay the other half, which was $400 a month. And I went back to them this year to see if we could do the same deal, where I would pay the 400, they would pay the 400, and they said till we at least figured out the direction of this bill, and they said no, go to the marketplace. So even the town that I took a bullet for, they no longer want to help me. Since I retired, it's just been that way. So here I am trying to live off of 66 2/3% of $21.50 an hour, while also paying health insurance and also having to focus on my recovery that's going to be lifelong. Dealing with the burden of my physical injuries and my mental ones. And on top of it all, like, I just can't afford life as it is. And I'm desperately asking for help. Like, I don't think this should be the way at all. And as the cost of inflation is skyrocketing, I'm only doing worse. And I just don't know where I'm going to go from here without additional help and support.
Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
We appreciate your service, really do, and I hope you have a good recovery with your arm. I had a farm injury on one of mine, and I understand the road you're going through. It's a long road, and I'm glad you have it, and I'm glad it's functioning, and I really wish you the best in getting it back to where it's supposed to be, and I certainly appreciate you sharing your story.
I appreciate it.
Any questions? Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, thank you. And just, I'm sitting here thinking, you know, young family, you're trying to defend your town, and just thank you so much for that. And I guess I would encourage you, don't be afraid to ask. There are people out there that want to help you financially, at least in the meantime, until this bill, if it's passed, to be able to help you. But there are people that want to help, and not just physically or financially, but even mentally, emotionally, to help you with this. Because you're still young. You still got a lot of life ahead of you. And just really appreciate you coming here and being very raw with your testimony as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I also do have written testimony, if I could submit
sure.
that. Just to...
Get that. They'll grab that from you and give it to the committee. Any further questions from the committee? Well, Paul, thank you. We really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you
and
so
sharing your
much.
story.
Thank you, all of you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this bill? I also have Elizabeth Sargent from the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police and Mark Bodoin from the New Hampshire Police Association, who have signed in favor. With that, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 134.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
would you entertain going into executive session since the sponsor has asked to retain this bill?
Sure. We want to do that now?
Yep, let's do that.
All right. I'll entertain a motion from Senator Carson. Turn your mic on, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the motion to go into executive session.
Do I have a second? I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Senator Carson, you have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move to re-refer Senate Bill 134 FN.
Do we have a second? Second by Senator Gendro. Any discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've met with the parties, and I know Senator Birdsall, when she came in to testify on the bill, she and I have both made the commitment to work through this issue. This is a bill that we had last year that was brought in by one of our former colleagues, Senator Kavanaugh, who sat on ED&A. And there was another process that we had asked Mr. Doherty to go through, and he did, and it did not work. So the commitment that I am making, as well as Senator Birdsall, is very strong. We are going to get this done, and if we can get this out of here, and we can get to work on this right away, and hopefully get this problem solved. So I hope my colleagues will join me in voting yes on ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further comments? Senator Perkins-Corbett?
Yeah, not to prolong it, I guess I'll support the motion. It does seem like this need is rather urgent, but it seems like there's a technical issue that needs to be worked out. Okay. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about that so we can understand it.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of technical issues, especially concerning the retirement system, as well as with workers' compensation.
Okay.
Quite frankly, I think that there needs to be an update. One of the things that I'm looking to do is to create a new subset that deals specifically with first responders that are victims of violent crimes. They're getting injured in the process of caring and doing their job, as you heard from the testimony today. And many of them are young men. They're not older folks. And if the more time you have in the service, either police or fire, the more benefits that you have. They haven't been there long enough to accrue those benefits. And they're usually at the beginning of their working life. So as you heard from Mr. Lewis, it's impacted his ability to even have a job, to not be able to use his right hand. So we have to start thinking about individuals that are getting these injuries and the impact it's going to have on them for the rest of their life. You're not talking about maybe another 40 years. You're talking about another 60 years. So we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to look at this and create perhaps a subset that's going to address this specifically, that is going to help these individuals and help any other person who wants to join the police department or our state troopers or our fire service, to know that if they get a significant injury, bodily injury due to a violent act, that we, the state, we're going to step up and we are going to help them, rather than to have them come here to the legislature begging us to help them. That, to me, that should not happen. That just should not happen. So,
Okay.
thank you.
I do appreciate the context, and thank you, Chair.
Senator Carson, this is a bill has a fiscal note. We do not actually have to have it out of committee until early March. Is there a possibility we could get it fixed in that amount of time in order to speed the bill along?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Thought it was worth asking.
That's okay.
Any further thoughts, comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Okay.
I'll accept now, we can put that on consent, right?
No, there's only four of
Doesn't
us
have to
here.
do that. Oh, that's right. I forgot.
So, but I will take it to the
You'll
floor.
take it up,
Yep.
okay. And with that, I'll take a motion to come back out of exec session.
So moved. Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're gonna open up the hearing on Senate Bill 204. I see Senator Prentice has been able to join us, so welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Pearl and members of Senate ED&A. I'm sure we all know what it's like this time of year, moving between buildings, and when two of your most important bills are scheduled at the exact same time for a hearing, it's a little stressful, but thank you for your indulgence. We made it. Okay, so for the record, my name is Sue Prentice. I'm the state senator from District 5, representing 15 communities, covering a large part of Grafton, a part of Sullivan, and one community in Merrimack County. By way of background, I'm a paramedic, and I work with a national not-for-profit called the American Trauma Society. And this group, as well as the work that I've done over the years, including in state government as your former trauma systems coordinator, this supports trauma systems of care, which are integrated systems from when from injury prevention to when, unfortunately, if they're injured, all the way through to a trauma survivors network of care. So this bill supports this. It includes bystander care. Specifically here, we are talking about the Stop the Bleed program. This puts a few key pieces of life-saving bleeding control equipment in the hands of the public. I am honored today to introduce Senate Bill 24, which amends RSA 153A, the Emergency Medical and Trauma Services Statute, requiring that state-owned and operated buildings have trauma kits available for use should a person, a member of the public, a staff member, experience a life-threatening hemorrhage. According to the American College of Surgeons, over 60,000 Americans die each year of an uncontrolled hemorrhage. Approximately 75% of these deaths are due to physical trauma, and that person experiencing a hemorrhage will bleed to death in under 5 minutes without intervention. Uncontrolled bleeding is the #1 cause of preventable death and injury after injury in the world. This is the time to basically lead and set an example for communities throughout New Hampshire by implementing a bleeding control program within state government. Working with administrative services, we identified over 200 buildings. We're looking at 221, and I know there's some different, I see a varying range in the fiscal note. That would be priority locations throughout the state that routinely experience high volumes of traffic, not just by staff, but by members of the public. This includes courthouses, DMVs, state liquor stores, and certainly our State House, which, by the way, is already moving ahead and installing these kits in anticipation. So the trauma kits are described in Section 2 of this bill. They would be installed again in these buildings. This bill does not require a training program to access and use these trauma kits to save a life. And this is modeled in the same way that we have automated external defibrillators, and you'll see them on each floor of this building. You're not required to have the training to use them. It's actually simple, it's intuitive, and it walks you through how to get the job done and to save a life. The public has demonstrated, I think it's really important for us to recognize that the public has demonstrated its awareness and ability to use these tools when provided with minimal and sometimes on-the-spot instructions. And you'll see in the equipment list that's provided in Section 2 that it talks about, a tourniquet, and it talks about bleeding control supplies and scissors and gloves, but there are also these very simple instructions that can be downloaded either from the American College of Surgeons or from FEMA, our Federal Emergency Management Agency, that could help guide somebody should they need to. You're going to hear examples today from some members of the medical community that have actually seen the public without any training take this up and actually save lives, not just here in the United States, but here in New England. So in this bill, we also included limited liability, and it provides the same protection that the Good Samaritan law, that's what people normally think about. We think about a member of the public, like caring for somebody, they would have the same protection that the Good Samaritan law provides. Local emergency room physicians and ones that serve as local EMS medical directors are also cited as resources. So they are not overseeing these buildings, and their direct connection is really to the local ambulance service. But they're tremendous resources should I be working at a state building that's in Berlin, New Hampshire, or in Claremont. I could actually access that local medical director who's familiar with this and say, what would be your suggestion for the type of, tourniquet and the type of bleeding supplies that we get? I think it's also important to note that these kits can run anywhere from $23 to $83. Some come prepackaged. Most are put together themselves and are no bigger than this, where they're stationed, except some of the ones that I see at airports that are much bigger. However, that's the bottom line where we need to go. I think we also need to remember that although the costs are low, the costs of this are low, the service, the life-saving services provides is absolutely priceless. Lastly, this bill establishes a dedicated fund for the purposes of receiving grants and gifts to fund additional kits and to replenish the supplies and extend this program to additional state buildings as we move forward. I'm really, again, based on the work that I have gotten to do over 30 years and, continue to do today on behalf of trauma and trauma systems, just so honored to bring this before you and ask that we put New Hampshire state government in the lead on saving lives with bleeding control and public access to it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I did bring, as you can see, some folks with me who are going to help with some supportive testimony.
Well, thank you, Senator. Any questions? Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Prentice. Question I have, so if this passes and I'm walking through the halls here at the State House, where would I find these trauma kits?
So thank you, Senator Gendro. Great question. The plan for the State House is to be putting them where the defibrillators are, because that's already a public access point. And as you raise this question, it just takes me to a place where it's really important, and we don't do this enough in this building, but I see it done now in large gatherings. It's just like when you get on an airplane and you take your seat and they remind you to put your seatbelt on. They tell you where the exits are and where the flotation devices are for a reason. We need to get into the habit of saying when we're in this building that especially when we're gathered with large groups, should you need an external defibrillator, here's an automatic external defibrillator, here's where it's located, and a trauma kit should somebody be experiencing bleeding.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate you bringing the bill.
Thank
in
you
to
very
us.
much. I'm going to stay with you to see if there's
Awesome.
anything else that I can do. And again, thank you for your time.
All right, Dr. Martin from the American College of Surgeons. He wishes to speak in favor. Good morning, welcome.
Oh, there you go. Red seems like it would be, oh, anyway. Thank you for the ability to sit here and support Senate Bill 204. I'm not normally this casual. I'm wearing a t-shirt that we wear when we are instructing a class called Stop the Bleed. I am a trauma surgeon at Dartmouth. I've been there almost 12 years. And I am the current chair of the Committee on Trauma, which is a subsection of the American College of Surgeons. So unfortunately, this concept of making every civilian bystander a first responder came out of most recently the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting. That really prompted a lot of motivation. Multiple organizations came together and sort of developed this concept and this teaching and many other aspects as far as first responders and police response. But it really reintroduced the concept of tourniquets being a useful tool, a fairly simple tool as well. And I brought just some samples of what those devices are. They're very small. And they are very user-friendly. So I think much like an AED, where it can save a life, but probably very infrequently, if ever used, these same devices can do have the same results. I think the benefit of this concept of bleeding kits is it does come with a lot of free education. The American College of Surgeons has taken this on, and they're really trying to ensure that these educational opportunities are free to anybody in the public. My trauma manager who was going to come and support this bill today, ironically, is teaching a class. So we really do offer travel, and every institution in this, every hospital, I would say, or community has someone who probably teaches this course for free just to get the knowledge base out there. So I do think it's a great concept. There are more and more that you're in public, you start noticing them. Airports, you'll see next to the AEDs, you'll see kits, and the kits are varying sizes. Some have one tourniquet, some have multiple tourniquets. So, and it's, I think it's be well supported.
Thank you. Would it be possible for you to provide the committee with the instructions that would be inside one of these kits so that we could get an understanding of what's there?
I don't know if Senator Prentice has something. I could get something off the American College of Surgeons, and we could.
Yeah, just send it to the committee if you could. I think it would be beneficial for us. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Doctor. How many do you think would be needed in a building this size?
I do think it depends on the traffic that you have and the risk assessment, I would imagine. And I don't know that I would be the one to sort of propose that. We've done teaching at schools where we've provided them a kit or two, and it's better to have one or two tourniquets than none. And I think, it really is, there's got to be the benefit and the cost at some point. I do think that, the number of people who are learning this, the skill set through these classes, it's greater than 2.5 million at this point, and that's probably an underestimate. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? So the items you have on the counter there, are they part of what's in the kit?
So this is a sample tourniquet and a hemostatic gauze. So there are a variety of different commercial products. But as Senator Prentice said, it would be, most kits, if it was the kits that I have in my car, these two devices, a pair of gloves, a marker. And that's, the basics, the bare minimum of what you need.
Sure. Well, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, we thank you for coming in today.
Thank
you. Dr. Grossman, am I reading that right?
Hello, members of the committee, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and Senators. I'm Mark Grossman of Exeter, and I'm an emergency physician with over 20 years of experience, also working with EMS, and I'm an EMS medical director. And I'm also serving currently on the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Team that's located in Massachusetts Task Force 1. And what I want to say about tourniquets is this is something that is a very simple lifesaver. It's as easy, if not easier to use than an AED. The training is very simple, and it's a lifelong skill. as opposed to CPR, where you really have to take a new training course every 2 years or so to remain current. With the Stop the Bleed training, it's just you take it once and you learn how to use tourniquets and how to stop the bleeding. I want to give the example of Parkland, the shooting at Parkland, which the school, not the hospital. But at Parkland, my friend is the EMS medical director for that community, for Parkland and for Coral Springs. And tourniquets were applied on 17 people, and all 17 lived. And 17 people also died. And it was either because they couldn't reach them or because they had central injuries that a tourniquet wouldn't have helped anyway. So tourniquet use early is very important. So once somebody goes into shock, it makes it less likely that they'll do well. It's, I believe, 92% improved chance of living if you apply it before they go into shock, meaning they've bled out so much that their blood pressure is low and their heart rate is high. 80% as compared to 80% improved survivability if a tourniquet is applied once they're in shock, so it's less. And I think it's 12 or 13% if no tourniquet is applied. So that's just driving to the hospital and hoping for the best. So early application really makes a big difference. And that's why I want to have it at the point of injury, namely a building or having something very close by that somebody can apply very quickly.
Thank you. I have one question myself, and then I'm going to give it to Senator Carson. When a tourniquet is applied, how is the limb, say it's on an arm, is the arm typically savable once the tourniquet is removed, or that lack of blood, what happens there?
Great question. So tourniquets actually fell out of favor for a very long time. They were in use after World War II and after Korea. And after probably in the 70s and the 80s, they went away from tourniquets for that reason, because the blood supply is obviously cut off because you want it to stop bleeding. And during the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, they did a lot of research with tourniquets, and they found that actually have at least 2 hours before you have permanent damage. And they also figured that the mitigation, having somebody with permanent neurologic damage, was better if they're alive to have that neurologic damage, sure, as compared to somebody who's dead because they exsanguinated needlessly because the tourniquet wasn't applied. So you have at least 2 hours. And there are things that we do to make sure that if we have multiple people with tourniquets on, we write with a Sharpie on the tourniquet itself. There's a space to write the time that we put it on so we can triage the patient. And then my teaching was always to write it on their forehead with a Sharpie, just write TQ and the time. And that way you can prioritize that this one's had the tourniquet for an hour and a half, this one's for 45 minutes, so we'll take the hour and a half first.
Sure.
And obviously it's just a temporizing measure to get them to the hospital safely and keep them alive.
Well, that makes sense. Thank you. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Doctor. I know we're talking about putting these trauma kits in state-owned buildings, but do you know if our first responders have access to these? Meaning, if you have a police officer that's out on the road and they get into some sort of an issue where they're injured, they've injured their arm or their leg and they need a tourniquet, are they available to them? Do they carry them?
So that depends on the department. I don't think there's a state mandate that police officers have to carry them. A lot of police officers do carry them in what's called an IFAC kit, which is individualized first aid kit. And if they do and they have that training, it's great because it's something they can use to save themselves. You can apply it to yourself if you are injured, and you can apply it obviously to somebody else, either a fellow first responder or a civilian. And having, again, that early intervention is very important. I believe most fire and EMS agencies have tourniquets. It's really the standard of care as far as I know. But again, I can't speak to every first responder. Do they all have that available to them? I worked for a very large fire department when I was in Florida, and we didn't have it. And it took, honestly, the Boston Marathon for me to convince the fire chief to purchase the kits for everybody. And then 2 weeks later, we had them. I mean, it's just so obvious what a benefit they are, and how many lives that they saved in Boston. So having first responders them available and also have the training is important. And again, I believe that most fire and EMS agencies and responders would have those available.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you for coming in. David, can't get the last name, sorry.
Hirsch?
Could be. Looks like a prescription.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. David Hirsch. I'm an emergency physician. I live in Bedford and work in Littleton, and that is about 115 miles apart, so I put on a lot of miles on my vehicle. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning, and thanks for the invitation to speak. I have some highlights that I wanted to go through with you regarding my support for this bill, and some of these points have been touched on already, so I'll skip through those and not and be respectful of your time. My background, I've been in EMS for about 25 years, which is hard to believe. I started as a firefighter and EMT on a volunteer basis, went to medical school, and now work as an emergency physician and EMS physician, which is emergency medical services, meaning I work out in the field with paramedics, firefighters, and police officers doing support, medical direction, oversight, and protocol development for them. So, reference to your question about tourniquets in the field, it hasn't ubiquitously been adopted, but we're working hard to do that. In many pockets, they're still absent, unfortunately, and we're working hard to remedy that. I'm in a unique position as well. I believe I'm the only physician in the state who's also a certified police officer, so I have that experience and perspective, which is, I think, important in this conversation. In that role, I provide training, oversight, and field response support, meaning I go out in the field and help with local, county, state, and federal law enforcement operations that are high risk, so I can provide immediate medical care, which again is kind of relevant to what we're speaking about here today. I think over my career, I've trained probably thousands of first responders and military personnel on bleeding control techniques, and seen that develop over the past 10 to 20 years. And it's changed quite a bit, as Dr. Grossman had mentioned, with the advent of commercialized tourniquets and equipment that we're showing you today. Things have changed a lot just over that short time frame. I want to share a personal experience with you. Dr. Grossman referenced the Boston Marathon bombing. I actually was at the finish line medical tent during that event. Had the sort of unfortunate opportunity to participate in that, and was at the bombing site within about a minute of the bombs going off, and had the opportunity to treat victims there. There are many lessons that I took from that day, both personally and professionally, but one of the images that sticks with me still are of untrained bystanders trying to provide bleeding control with t-shirts and belts and things that they had and found in nearby stores. And, I think that was helpful until the EMS professionals could get there to start providing advanced medical care. But if we could provide better equipment for our bystanders, I think we could have an even better outcome and support our bystanders if, an event like that were to happen again. I won't highlight any statistics. Some of those have been covered already. One I wanted to point out is that in the U.S., hemorrhage is the 4th leading cause of death. In New Hampshire, it's actually the 3rd. So we have a very safe state from a crime standpoint, but I think we work hard and play hard. So there are a lot of injuries that I see on a day-to-day basis working in the ER, and they may be as simple as kitchen accidents, recreational injuries, things that happen at work. We've seen chainsaw injuries that cause these type of situations. And then, of course, car accidents would be a common situation where we see bleeding. And fortunately, we don't see a lot of violent crime in many parts of the state. So just to expand the scope of what we're talking about, there are a lot of other opportunities for helping victims of bleeding. I wanted to talk a little bit about our EMS resources as well. Senator Prentice mentioned that if you suffer a severe episode of hemorrhage, you can bleed to death within 3 to 5 minutes. In most parts of the state, you can't receive medical care within 3 to 5 minutes. Working in the northern part of the state, we have response times of 20 to 30 plus minutes sometimes. Actually, yesterday, one of my local EMS services actually closed permanently because of funding and personnel resources. And so they're now relying on neighboring towns to respond, which even if that ambulance is available, could take at least 20 minutes to get to that town. So it just highlights the need for bystander treatment because we're not in a situation where we can get our medical resources to patients that need our help within that short time frame that's necessary. The other opportunities Senator Prentice highlighted were in conjunction with working with local medical facilities at hospitals with EMS medical directors, and I'd also like to highlight the opportunity to work with police, fire, and EMS agencies who have adopted this training. I know the New Hampshire State Police, who I work with closely, have adopted this, and they carry bleeding control kits on each trooper currently. And so there are resources and opportunities for partnership with our local public safety officers that we could use going forward to help provide training and support if this were to pass. In conclusion, it's my experience, both professionally and personally, with experiences that I've had, that people want to help when there's an emergency. And I think this bill will help give them the tools necessary to help provide emergency medical care and help save lives. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank
Senator
you.
Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Doctor, for being here this morning. How much does one of those kits cost? Say, me, private citizen, say, you know, I want to keep one in my house because you never know. And so if I was to go out and buy it, how much would it cost?
So depending what you want to put in it, a tourniquet costs about $25, the hemostatic dressing about another $25, and then you probably wouldn't need gloves if you're taking care of yourself, but you might want to include some trauma shears, which might be $10. So for about $60, you could probably have a nice kit. And a lot of the people that I provide training for actually make their own kits to take when they're out hunting or snowmobiling up north where they know they're not going to be near medical resources. So they use the kits professionally when they're helping taking care of the public, but also do exactly what you're saying and create their own personal kit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Hirsch, for being here. It's
Morning.
good to see somebody from Littleton.
Thank you.
Question I have on the kit itself, you had mentioned trauma shears, and of course on the list it's scissors. You know, of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we've got these kits in public buildings. Is there a chance that somebody could get into that kit and use the scissors for a weapon?
Good question. I don't think so. The trauma shears and the scissors are one and the same.
Okay.
And they're created specifically to not really be able to be pointed and sharp, so you could stab
Okay.
somebody with it. They're rounded at the edge. For when we're cutting people's clothes, it's rounded so that we don't cut them accidentally. So,
Okay. Okay, good.
they are
Thank
very
you.
safe. But good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. Follow up?
Follow-up? Sure.
So, and then I noticed too, the one bleeding control bandage, if there's head trauma, clearly you can't put a tourniquet around the neck.
Right.
So it's good to see that there's a control bandage there
Yes.
for the head trauma.
Great point. And we highlight that in our training to paramedics and EMTs also. You'd be surprised what people think of sometimes. But correct, the tourniquet is for extremity hemorrhage, and the hemostatic agent is for any other hemorrhage. So anything on the torso, neck, head, anything like that. So we control that with direct pressure, and then the gauze actually has an agent embedded in it that helps promote blood clotting.
Good.
So that's the benefit of that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I won't say it. Anyway. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Can I just show, it would be useful to show on Dr. Hirsch how to put a tourniquet on?
Sure, come ahead.
Literally takes.
Sure, come ahead.
We're going to get a demonstration.
So it comes like this in a plastic bag, and really you just unvelcro this, put this on. This goes in here. I want to read the suit. We don't get to wear suits a lot.
Dr. Martin, apologize for being too casual. I apologize for being too formal. Normally I'm wearing scrubs or camouflage.
So this goes like this. This white part here, the strip, actually is where you write the time. And then you turn this, and that tightens it. And it goes into this little clip here. And you obviously will tighten it until the bleeding stops.
Yeah.
Right? And it is uncomfortable, and the patient or the person will know that it's on, but they'll be alive to tell you and complain that it hurts. So that's really the great thing.
So when you're applying that tourniquet, if it's say a hand injury, do you stay down lower on the arm to limit the amount of exposure to the limb without any blood?
Yeah, great question. So in that case, if you're able to visualize the injury and it's a distal injury like you're mentioning, we'd want to put the tourniquet 2 to 3 inches above that.
Mhm.
In a dangerous situation, say a police officer is dealing with an active threat, they would put the tourniquet as high as they can and just put it as tight as they can initially. And then when the situation becomes safe, we would readjust the tourniquet and move it lower.
Sure.
So that we're not creating as much limb that's having blood flow.
That was my thought, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, great. Senator Carson.
Thank you, doctors, for doing that demonstration. Most citizens are familiar with a tourniquet when they have to have blood drawn, and it's, you know, a very small, thin piece of material. And I think having that type of demonstration to show that this is very, very serious and there is a method to put it on. And also, I know that you folks were sitting here when we had the testimony from Officer Lewis and how he talked about that he was shot in the arm and his artery was severed, and that he got a tourniquet on his arm right away, and it helped save him. So I do believe that there's a real need for this and the education. I appreciate the education. I'm going to go out and get one of these to keep in my house.
It's very important to just have the distinction between the tourniquets that you get blood drawn with, which are called venous tourniquets, as opposed to these, which are arterial tourniquets, which are much more robust and tightened to an extent to cut off circulation to the artery, which is made of muscle. You can try and put a venous tourniquet on to stop bleeding from an artery, you can actually make it worse. So it's very important to have the equipment available and the training to use it appropriately.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Great distinction. My quick story on that, my mother-in-law's
Come back to the mic if you will,
My
just so that
mother-in-law's a
folks at
family
home
practice
can hear.
nurse, and she knows that I do this type of work. And so she brought me a box of tourniquets from work that they had extra, and they were the blood draw venous constricting bands that used to blood draw blood. So I thanked her very much and told her it's not exactly what we're using, but it was great to help.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much for
thank
coming in. We appreciate it. Anyone else that wants to speak on this? Yes, sir. Come on up. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Neil Moore, so I'm the Trauma Program Manager at Parkland Medical Center in Derry. I also sit on the Vice Chair of the Trauma Medical Review Committee for the state. I'm also a First Lieutenant with the National Guard. I've been a nurse for 28 years now. I've been teaching Stop the Bleed for 6 years. I teach a lot of the community. I've also, in reference to your question, Senator Gendro, so I teach at Andover with the IRS. They asked us to go out and teach pretty much every year. So what they have the AEDs on the walls. They also have the Stop the Bleed kits on the walls. So if there's an injury of any kind, they grab the AED and they also grab the Stop the Bleed kit and they go straight to that patient. So one thing I also wanted to mention, so I've taught kids as young as 8. I've also taught adults as young as 76 years old. So it's pretty easy training. The younger kids usually get it quicker than the adults do.
Any questions? Well, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I have no one else signed up to speak. I have Paula Minahan, who's in favor from the New Hampshire Hospital Association, and Nancy Vaughn, who's in favor from the American Heart Association. Anybody else before I close the hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 204. Okay. We're going to go ahead and open the public hearing on Senate Bill 146 and recognize the prime sponsor, our own chairman, Senator Pearl. Thank you, Chairman Carson. For the record, my name is Howard Pearl from District 17. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 146 relative to the Agricultural Advisory Board. This bill removes certain requirements for the terms of the members of the Agricultural Advisory Board, and I'm bringing this forward today at the request of Commissioner Jasper. He has done an extensive review of the board and its duties, and he has asked me to bringing this forward so that he can make some changes that has been recommended by himself and the board. And I've spoken to the president of the board, Dennis Ward, and he has confirmed with me that he is in favor of the changes as well. So I'm not going to give too much of the technical parts of it. I'm going to let Commissioner Jasper explain that, as he's much more knowledgeable on it than I am. But happy to answer any questions if there is any that I can.
Thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions for Senator Pearl? Okay, seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Sean Jasper, or Commissioner Jasper.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food, and I first want to thank Senator Pearl for bringing forth the bill and the amendment. The original bill was something that came out of a meeting that was held back in, I believe it was November, of the Agricultural Advisory Committee, but after that, going through my confirmation hearing, a number of things came forward in that hearing which caused me to take a deeper look at the duties of the board, and then brought those issues to the advisory committee, and they unanimously have recommended the changes that are part of the amendment. I think there has certainly been a lot of confusion as came out during my confirmation or reconfirmation hearing about the board, and so I want to give you a brief history of the board. The minutes that are housed at the department go back to 1979. Until 1996, the board had the duty to consider and formulate the general policies of the department. Until 96, the commissioner served as chairman and called the meetings. Until 96, the board was mandated to meet at least 4 times a year. Except to approve minutes, there were no motions made from 1979 until February 23rd, 1981. And that motion was to oppose removing the Division of Pesticides from the department. On September 12th, 1982, another motion was made relative to pesticides. Until 1982, in 1982, they did make a recommendation on the next commissioner. In 1983, the board met with Governor John Sununu. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. In 1983, there was a motion to approve to combine the department's 2 labs. Beginning in 1983, the board began to tour farms. Also in 83, the board stopped making motions to approve minutes. So no minutes were approved in the last 40 years until this last meeting. In 87 and 92, the board did make recommendations as to who the next commissioner should be. And from 1984 through 1995, no motions were made in public session. During the preceding years, the board never met quarterly as required by law. In most years, from 86 through 95, the board only met once a year. Through 95, the board never held any public hearings as required by law, except on a couple of rules and on weekly market bulletin subscription pricing, and no policy recommendations were made. In 1996, the law was changed and the board was only required to meet twice a year. They also no longer had oversight over the department policy. The governor was also required to appoint a chairman, which was not done until 2007. So 11 years after the law changed, before there was actually a chairman. The commissioner continued to call meetings and act as the chairman for those 11 years. On October 26, 2001, the board gave its support to a USDA grant for specialty crops. On November 19, 2007, the board recommended that the commissioner organize a meeting of commodity groups, etc. That is the last time the minutes show that the board made a recommendation, other than on commissioner appointments, although many minutes are actually missing from the records. The records show there were 3 meetings in 2008, 1 in 2009, 1 in 2010, 1 in 2011. There is no record showing that any meetings were held in 2012. There were 2 meetings in 2013 and 1 in 2014. There are no records showing that any meetings were held in 2015 or 16. There were made on appointments of the commissioner in 97, in 2002, and 2007. There are no records of recommendations being made in 2012 or in 17. However, I know there was a recommendation made in 2017 because they did recommend me as a potential commissioner. From 1979 onward, no public hearings have been held as required by law except it is noted as above. And the meetings since 1979 have largely been devoted to farm tours and reports from the county representatives. The board has never taken any action to fill any of their duties as they relate to USDA, UNH, or farm organizations, and hence the amendment that Senator Pearl has put forward. The original bill did away with a lot of language that really expired, the necessity for having that expired in 2006. That was related to terms, and we're also recommending that that members can be eligible for reappointment. It is not easy to get people to apply for these. I did work with Farm Bureau and through the Weekly Market Bulletin trying to get people to apply, and that was largely unsuccessful. So in the amendment as proposed,
Commissioner, if I can interrupt for one second.
Certainly.
They don't have the amendment yet because
Okay.
I neglected to bring it, but my aide is on
All
its
right.
way with it, so you'll have it momentarily.
All right.
My apologies.
wondering if I heard that right.
It's coming.
So anyhow, so I'll just fill up the time by saying, hope you can see that while a lot of people made, a lot about what the board was supposed to do, it really hasn't done anything, and hence I wasn't really considering it terribly seriously over the years because the board itself hadn't really taken itself seriously, in my opinion. I think we have a reconstituted board, which is going to be more focused and has committed to actually doing more. All right. So hopefully your amendment in the unapproved one that I have line up line-wise, but I'm sure it's highlighted. So interestingly enough, on line 5, among the duties that the board had, it didn't include reviewing the laws. So we felt it was appropriate to put that in, to have them have that specific authorization. And it appears that language about advertising at least one public hearing was probably left over from the days when they actually did have duties to hold public hearings on certain things, and the board felt that should be advertised for each meeting for public input instead of a hearing, because the question was, well, what are we gonna hold a hearing on? That's a good question. And so then the strikeouts beginning on line 10, going down through line 15 are about those things which they've never done, and then asking the board, is this something you think that we can accomplish with a mandate of 2 meetings a year? No one had any idea how these things would actually be done, and they certainly haven't been done in probably at least 45 years. Coming out of the public hearing was this idea that I'm this big scary guy and people are very intimidated by me and don't want to speak up. And I've been told that all my life. So I did take that to heart and made this suggestion to them beginning on line 16, that any member of the board or public may request that the commissioner be excused for any portion of the public input, at which time the commissioner shall leave the meeting. That was my recommendation, and the board adopted that. And so those are the changes that are recommended. We also have some, I had some policy recommendations for the committee, which so far they are agreeable to, which is trying to meet 4 times a year in different parts of the state, with only one meeting being held here in Concord, specifically so that they can hear from the directors, and I don't have to take all of my directors and potentially take them off their job for a full day. They'll be able to meet with us here, but the others would be around the state. We will publish the names of all of the members of the board and their email addresses in the market bulletin with an agenda at least 2 weeks prior to the meeting, so that if people have concerns, they'll know where the meetings are going to be, they'll know who to contact. So that's pretty much it. And so the board and I recommend that you adopt this bill as amended.
Thank you. 1 second, Senator Carson. There's one other thing that the amendment does, and it changes the effective date from 60 days to upon passage.
Oh,
Just
all right.
one note I wanted
Yeah,
to.
that wasn't on the copy I had, so
Yeah,
I wasn't
it's
gonna
because
push-
I caught it after I sent
Okay.
that to you, and I sent it
Yeah.
back to him and made him fix it.
All
So
right, thank you, because
You're
there
very welcome. Senator
certainly is no reason that any of these changes need to be noticed for 60 days.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I'm looking at the language that's on lines 16 and 17. And while there might be some people out there that think you're a really big, scary guy, I know differently that you're not.
Thank you.
But it's not about you, it's about the position of the commissioner.
Correct.
So I'm just a little concerned about having that language in there. I mean, any board can put this in, and members of the public say, well, I don't want to see that person. But it's not so much about that. You hold the position of being the commissioner. And if someone is there complaining, especially if it's you or any member of your staff, you need to be there to hear that. And so they're saying, no, yeah, we don't want you there. And I just have a problem with that.
Well, I don't disagree with you. The one thing that I would say is, because the commissioner is not a member of the board, there's actually nothing in the statute that even requires the commissioner to be there. So certainly I leave that to your discretion. I put that forward based on what I was hearing at my confirmation hearing, and thought that it was a way to address that. And you're right, it may be just me, but it could be the next commissioner. And my assumption is whatever the board hears from people who come, they're going to bring those useful parts directly back to the commissioner and give them advice. So I'm
May I
not
ask a
worried about
question?
that going forward, but I appreciate your comments.
Well, like, would you be more comfortable if this just said any member of the board may request? That way it's not bringing the public in specifically, but the public could request of a board member? Would
Well-
that be more acceptable?
Mr. Chairman, I think with the commissioner's testimony that there might be members of the public who feel intimidated by the commissioner.
Mhm.
So I do think that that needs to stay in there. The question that I had is, does the board have the ability to go into 91A non-public to discuss an employee?
The board doesn't, because they don't have any oversight over any board or anything. So I don't think that, the one time that I believe they do have the ability to do that is every 5 years when they're making a recommendation. And in fact, there are no minutes. Unfortunately, there's no actual motion to go into non-public either on any of these. It just, the board met to discuss, make a recommendation to the governor. I don't think they've been doing it the right way. I do think they need to make that formal motion, and there needs to be a record of what they did, because frankly, you would never know by looking at any of the records who they actually recommended to the governor. I don't know if they sent a letter. There's not a copy of the letter in the file or anything. So it hasn't been done according to what my understanding of the right to know law.
I have just hopefully a final question. So are you telling us that they don't take minutes of any meeting?
We do now.
Okay.
So the last 2 meetings, and actually, so there is a clerk of, or secretary of the board. That didn't seem to be very effectual. The commissioner seemed to be just putting together his notes, and those sufficed as things. We're clearing that up. What we're doing now, because it can be, the last meeting lasted 2.5 hours. What we're doing is recording those minutes, and then my administrative assistant is transcribing them, sending them to the secretary, who will send them out to the board for approval at the next meeting. But we are recording them and actually putting the parts in that need to be in minutes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Jasper, for being here. I got a call not that long ago from one of my farmer constituents, and they had heard that somebody from the department, and I'm not even sure if this would be it or another department, that there's going to be reviews on the farm, and they were concerned about their cows, their cattle, being injected with the COVID vaccine. So,
No.
so I had no idea. I had no idea that this was even this advisory board, or so I can now get back to that constituent with full assurance that there's no worries there.
Yeah, we are not going out and vaccinating anybody's cows. That's the job of their veterinarians. We go out as far as cattle and do blood testing as we do with poultry
Okay.
to make sure there are no diseases. But and those are those tests take place at the lab at the university. Yeah, this is why I think a lot of people do call me with these questions. Obviously, some don't, but I think having people known within their counties, having those names published, although they are published in the Red Book, but putting them in the Market Bulletin every few months, they'll be able to hopefully address those. There's a lot of confusions about what we do. Pretty much the only actual I mean, we have certain areas that we do inspections on. The new area that is new is the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is something we do under federal law, and everybody agreed they want to have our inspectors there rather than have federal inspectors coming in. And those are more robust, and then there are some other voluntary programs, which your chairman is very, very aware of. I actually, when I was first commissioner, went with our inspectors to his farm because I wanted to learn about how the process worked.
Sure.
And so going there through that process was very helpful to me. And
Great.
I appreciate that.
I didn't even bill him for the experience.
I think he offered me a cup of coffee, so that.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Commissioner, we
All right,
appreciate your
thank you
testimony.
very much.
So that is the only speaker I have. Anybody else wish to speak before I close the hearing? All right, so we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 146. And we will reopen the hearing on Senate Bill 147, which is dealing with the relative to the Board of Dental Examiners. So do we have somebody from the board that wants to come up and speak? We do, right here. I just got the sheet. Lisa, are you Lisa?
No. Good morning. I think still morning.
Yes.
Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Eaton. I am
Okay.
board counsel at OPLC, and I'm here on behalf of the Dental Examiner Board and with two of our members of the board. And I just wanted to introduce them, and then I'll let them come and speak,
Okay.
If that's okay.
Certainly.
So Lisa Scott, she is a member of our board. She's a dental hygienist and the department chair at NHTI. And Linda Tatarchuk, she is a public board member. She has a MSW in public policy. And so they're here prepared to answer as many questions as possible on
All
this
right.
bill.
Well, we'll start with Lisa then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good
Mr.
morning.
Chairman, Senators Committee.
I know Lisa Scott quite well.
Yes, you do.
It's been a lot of years. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
So I'm here to discuss changes sought through SB 147 and the reasons behind it. First of all, of the 6 dentist members on the board, we are requesting 1 to have a permit for deep sedation and general anesthesia so that the board always has a person who has the expertise regarding sedation to advise the board on this matter and be available to provide oversight on the anesthesia and sedation committee that the board is creating through legislative changes. The board is requesting for an anesthesia and sedation committee which existed previously through rules but was disbanded because the board was advised to create this committee through legislative changes. This committee would advise the board on sedation issues and recommend rules and legislative changes needed regarding sedation. This committee would also be suggesting the requirements that a licensee would need to satisfy to get a facility and an individual permit for sedation. This committee would also create the simulated exams that would be used to examine licensees by the inspectors that were recently hired to perform site inspections and comprehensive evaluations for sedation permits. I have two forms here. The first one is the facility permit, which is being created now. There are very few individual practitioners in private practice. Most practices have now multiple practitioners. Currently, if a practitioner applies for a sedation permit, based on the current rules, the site first gets inspected. Then a few months later, the provider has a comprehensive exam, which includes another site inspection. If this site now brings on another provider a year later, we have to go through the whole cycle again. By creating a facility permit, the board would be able to eliminate redundant inspections for a site that has already had a site inspection and is bringing another provider. I also have another form for the facility hosting permit. Currently, if a dental office contracts with a sedation provider such as an MD anesthesiologist or a CRNA or a dental anesthesiologist, the non-dental providers do not come under the board's jurisdiction. By creating the facility hosting permit, the board would be able to track where such itinerant providers are being used and set requirements for the facility to make sure that sedation is being delivered in safety. The board has already established the requirements that the facilities would have to satisfy to get these permits. These are the same requirements that the current licensees have to satisfy when they have a site inspection or comprehensive evaluations. And then I have copies of the forms if you would like them. Is just one copy enough of each? How many do you want? Okay, yeah, I've got both. Yeah, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of that one, and 6 of the other one. 4, 5, 6. There you go.
All right, does that complete your testimony?
It does.
Okay, any questions from the board? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Okay,
Good to see you again.
thank you.
We'll bring up Linda. Who is also from the Board of Dental Examiners. Good morning.
I am. Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of SB 147. My name is Linda Tatarchuk, and I'm a public member. I've been a public member of the Board of Dental Examiners since 2015, and my role as a public member is to represent the general public as an informed consumer and hopefully as an advocate for coherent and well thought out rules that hopefully keep the public safe. I have a master's in social work in public policy and planning, and I really have been very proud of the work that this board has done. We have had certainly some serious self-study in the last year, which I imagine you're well aware of, and I think that the goal of every dentist that I've encountered on this board has been to make the public safer and to hopefully make access to dental services more available and safe. And this particular issue before us with anesthesia certainly is one of those things that in private practice or in general practice, doing anesthesia has certain risks. And hopefully the plan that we have before the Senate with this bill would make it safer and more available. And especially, as I understand, access to hospital services for this type of work is exceedingly limited at this point in time because of the constraints on healthcare. So I would urge the committee to, or your board to affirm this bill as it's being presented. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you for coming in, both of you. We appreciate it. Any questions for Linda? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak on the, excuse me, on this bill before I close the hearing?
I think that's all that we have from the board.
Okay. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 147.